The night my children told me to move into a retirement home, the air in my kitchen turned colder than the January wind outside. The radiator hissed, the ceiling light buzzed, but all I heard was my son's flat voice. "Dad, it's time. You don't need that old apartment anymore. We'll take care of the sale." My fork slipped from my hand and clattered against the plate. My daughter stared at me over her wine glass, smiling too quickly, as if the word sale was something sweet. The smell of baked chicken filled the room, but I couldn't taste a thing. I had lived in that apartment for 42 years. I patched its pipes, painted its walls, buried my wife from that doorway. It wasn't just bricks and plaster. It was the last place where her laughter still seemed to echo in the corners. And now my own children were circling it like vultures, pretending they were helping me while sharpening the knives. I forced a smile, swallowing the bitterness in my throat. "You're right," I said softly. "Maybe it's time." Their shoulders relaxed. They thought they'd won. That night, after they left, I walked through each room with the lights off. The moon spilled silver across the floorboards, showing every scratch, every dent I'd left through the decades. In the bedroom, I knelt down, pulled out the drawer of my old oak desk, and reached underneath. My fingers brushed against the rough tape that had held firm for years. The envelope was still there. Inside, documents they didn't know existed. My original ownership papers. Proof of my share in the old cooperative tied to this building. I sat in the dark, the envelope heavy in my hands, and felt something colder than sadness settle into me. My wife once warned me, "Too much kindness makes you invisible." She was right. They thought I was weak, ready to be shelved away like old furniture. But I wasn't weak. I was waiting. The next morning, my daughter arrived with coffee and that same bright smile, rehearsed and sharp around the edges. She placed a thin stack of papers in front of me. "Dad, just some forms. Nothing complicated. We'll handle everything." Her voice was sugar. The papers stank of deceit. I glanced at the first page. The date in the corner was wrong. 3 weeks before our conversation. A trick. A lie. A trap. I looked up, nodded slowly, and reached for the pen. My hand trembled, but not from age. From rage, I had to bury under calm. I scrawled something across the line. Not my real signature, something close enough to fool their hungry eyes, but different enough that no court would ever mistake it for mine. My daughter exhaled, relieved. "See? That wasn't so hard." She gathered the papers like a thief pocketing jewelry, kissed my cheek, and left humming to herself. I poured the untouched coffee down the sink, watching the black swirl disappear into the drain. The bitterness stayed in my mouth. That evening, I went to visit my neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, who had lived in this building even longer than me. Her living room smelled of cinnamon and dust. She poured me tea and leaned forward when I asked the question I already knew the answer to. "Did you see anyone near my door last week? Papers, maybe?" Her eyes narrowed. "Your son, and another man, well-dressed. He looked like a notary. They didn't see me, but I saw them." I nodded, sipping tea that suddenly tasted like iron. That was all the confirmation I needed. Upstairs, in my apartment, I spread the envelope of real documents across the table. Ownership papers, cooperative shares, the proof that this place was more than an apartment. It was a treasure they couldn't even imagine. They thought I was invisible. They thought they were clever. But while they sharpened their knives, I was already sharpening mine. And the first cut would come sooner than they expected. The following days I moved through my routines like any tired old man. I swept the floor, fed the pigeons on the balcony, walked to the corner shop for bread and milk. My children thought they'd already clipped my wings. Let them. The more invisible I seemed, the sharper I could make my knife. I kept their papers folded neatly in a drawer, right next to the real documents. Every night, I pulled both stacks out, laying them side by side under the yellow kitchen lamp. The forged ones were rushed, cheap, letters misaligned, stamps blurred. My daughter had slipped them to me with a smile, thinking she'd fooled her father. I almost pitied her. Almost. One evening, I visited an old acquaintance, Pavel Novak, a notary I'd known since my construction days. His office smelled of ink and old wood, the walls lined with file cabinets that groaned with secrets. I slid the papers across his desk. He read them once, then again, his lips tightening. "This signature isn't yours," he said quietly. "And the authorization date is fabricated. Sloppy work. Whoever handled this could face criminal charges." I leaned back in the chair, letting the satisfaction bloom slow in my chest. That's all I needed to hear. On my way out, Pavel caught my arm. "You could bring this to the police right now? End it." I shook my head. "Not yet. They think I'm asleep. I want them to keep believing that. The fall hits harder when they don't see it coming." That night, the building felt different. Even the stairwell seemed to hum with secrets. Mrs. Alvarez, my neighbor, met me halfway up the stairs, clutching her shopping bag. "Your daughter and that man came again yesterday, whispering in the hallway, pointing at your door." Her eyes narrowed. "They don't respect walls anymore." I thanked her. "When the time comes, I may need you to tell your story. Would you?" She placed a hand over her chest. "Of course. I've seen enough of people pretending to love while planning theft." The next morning, I planted the first trap. I called my son and told him, voice tired and resigned, that I had been thinking about the retirement home. "Maybe you're right," I said, coughing into the phone. "Maybe I don't need the apartment anymore. Just make sure everything is handled properly." He sounded triumphant, trying and failing to hide it. "Don't worry, Dad. We'll take care of everything. Just relax." Relax. As if I hadn't been carrying them for 40 years. As if every school fee, every doctor's bill, every wedding expense hadn't passed through my hands first. That evening, I sat by the window, watching headlights sweep across the street below. I thought about all those years of sacrifice, the nights I worked double shifts to pay for Christopher's college, the mornings I went without so Lily could have her first apartment. They'd mistaken my kindness for weakness. They'd mistaken my silence for surrender. But in my desk drawer sat the real ownership papers, untouched. In my jacket pocket, a voice recorder, new, bought with cash, ready to catch every word of their greed. And in my chest, a fire I hadn't felt in years. They believed they had trapped me in age, in loneliness, in dependence. But I wasn't the one in the cage. They were. And with every day, I was tightening the lock. The third Sunday after their kind suggestion, I heard heavy steps on my staircase. Voices too. Male, confident, careless. I stayed in my chair by the window, back straight, coffee cooling at my elbow. Through the frosted glass of the door, I saw 3 shadows, my son, my daughter, and 2 strangers. Keys rattled. My son's voice, smug. "Don't worry, Dad won't be around much longer. This will all be clean." I let them in. Opened the door myself before he could fumble with his stolen copy. "Evening," I said, my tone light, almost warm. "And who do we have here?" The taller stranger extended a hand. "We're here about the apartment. Lovely place." I smiled, cold behind my teeth. "Yes, it is lovely. Especially when it's not for sale." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. My daughter's face drained of color. My son forced a laugh, the kind that fools no one. "Dad's joking. We just wanted to." I stepped aside, gesturing into the living room. "Come in by all means. Since you're here, let me give you the full picture." The buyers shuffled uncertainly, but entered. They glanced around at the photos on the walls, my wife, my children when they were young, family holidays. Every frame a reminder of what betrayal costs. I took my time, poured myself another cup of coffee, the steam rising between us like a veil. Then I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a folder. I set it down on the table with a deliberate slap. "These are the real ownership papers," I said. "Signed, sealed, registered. And these," I held up the flimsy pages my daughter had brought weeks earlier, the false authorization with my forged signature. "These are forgeries. Criminal. If you buy from them, you're buying air. And when the police come knocking, and they will, you'll lose your money and your name." The strangers exchanged a look, one muttering, "You didn't say," before trailing off. My son tried to grab the forged papers, but I slapped my hand down first. "Not so fast," I said quietly. "You wanted to play games in my home. Let's play." The taller buyer raised both hands, backing toward the door. "We'll think about it. Excuse us." In less than a minute, they were gone, the sound of their shoes clattering down the stairwell. The door shut, and the apartment felt smaller, heavier. My son's face burned red, fury and panic twisting together. What the hell are you doing? You're ruining everything. Everything, I repeated, voice calm, almost gentle. You mean your little scheme? Selling what was never yours? My daughter tried to speak, her voice shaky. Dad, we thought. I leaned forward, my eyes cutting through both of them. You thought I was blind. You thought age had dulled me. But I saw every step, every lie, every greedy glance. They stood frozen, caught between anger and shame, but not enough of either to make them leave. I tapped the folder once more, the sound echoing in the quiet room. Next time you bring strangers into my home, remember this. I've lived through harder winters than you'll ever know. I've seen men lose everything because they mistook kindness for weakness. Don't make that mistake again. Neither of them answered. My son's fists clenched, then loosened. My daughter looked at the floor. Get out, I said, not raising my voice. Leave my house. They left, silent, the door closing like a verdict. I stood alone in the kitchen, the smell of coffee still hanging in the air. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from restraint. That had been just a test strike, just enough to rattle them. The real blow would come later, when the stage was larger and the audience bigger. For now, I let the silence return, heavy and patient. Because silence, when you know how to use it, is deadlier than any shout. For 3 days after I threw them out of my apartment, the phone stayed silent. No calls, no texts, not even a pitiful knock on my door. The silence wasn't peace. It was plotting. I could feel it under my skin the way a man feels a storm coming. Pressure in the air, electricity prickling the back of the neck. On the 4th night, Mrs. Alvarez stopped me on the stairs, her grocery bag trembling in her thin arms. They were back, she whispered. Your son, your daughter. Whispering with a man in a leather coat. They think nobody sees, but this building has eyes. She pressed a hand to mine. Be careful. I thanked her, climbed to my apartment, and locked the door behind me. I sat in the dark at the kitchen table, the smell of leftover cabbage stew still clinging to the air, and thought about how far they would go. Children don't just stumble into betrayal once. Once they cross that line, it gets easier every time. The next morning, the call finally came. My daughter's voice was sugar mixed with shards of glass. Dad, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. We only want what's best for you. The apartment is too big. Too much work. You deserve comfort. There's a wonderful retirement facility outside the city, peaceful gardens, medical staff. We toured it already. They even reserved a room. A room. Like I was luggage to be stored. I played along, my voice soft, weary. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time. Her relief rushed through the phone line. Good. We'll take care of the paperwork. Don't worry about a thing. That same afternoon, I called Pavel, the notary. We met in his office, where the light was thin and the dust hung in slow motion. I slid the forged documents across his desk. They're pushing harder, I said. He examined the papers again, shaking his head. These signatures won't survive a single expert review. If they try to file them, it's fraud. Pure and simple. Good, I said. Then I'll let them file. He frowned. You're setting a trap. Yes, I replied. And when it snaps shut, I want witnesses. The next week, they brought buyers again. This time, I didn't wait by the door. I sat in my chair by the window, the old curtains half drawn, listening. Strangers' voices floated through the hallway, asking questions about square footage, renovations, price. My son's voice oozed with fake confidence, promising everything. When the key turned, I opened the door before they could pretend. Welcome, I said, stepping aside. Come, see the apartment you're trying to steal. The buyers froze, confusion flashing across their faces. My daughter stammered. Dad, please, we're just... I cut her off, my voice sharp. Selling air. Selling lies. I laid the folder on the coffee table again, papers spread wide. Real ownership documents on one side, forged copies on the other. Then I pulled out something new, a small digital recorder. I pressed play. My son's voice filled the room, captured from his careless whisper weeks ago. Don't worry, Dad won't be around much longer. This will all be clean. The buyers looked at one another, eyes wide. One muttered, "We're not part of this," and bolted for the door. The other followed fast, muttering curses under his breath. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. My son's face was crimson, his fists tight, rage radiating from him. My daughter's eyes glistened, but it wasn't guilt, it was fear. Fear of exposure. I leaned back, folded my arms, and let the quiet stretch until they squirmed. "Next time you bring strangers into my home," I said evenly, "I won't be the only one waiting. There will be others here. People with pens, cameras, badges." They stared at me, but neither dared speak. My son muttered something under his breath, then grabbed his coat. My daughter lingered half a second longer, lips trembling, then followed him out. When the door slammed, I sat in the hush of the apartment. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the steady climb of certainty. They were desperate now. Desperate people make mistakes, and mistakes are what I was counting on. That night, I wrote names on a notepad, people I trusted. Pavel, the notary. Mrs. Alvarez, the neighbor. An old journalist friend from my union days, the kind who loved nothing more than exposing corruption. They would all be guests at the next family dinner. The roast chicken, the wine, the table set just so, it would all return. But this time, the audience would be larger. And when the curtain fell, it wouldn't be just family watching the mass shatter. It would be the whole town. I spent the week in silence, letting them think they'd broken me. My daughter called twice, her voice sweet as rotten fruit, assuring me that the paperwork is nearly done. My son sent one curt message, "Start packing. We'll move you to the home soon." I didn't answer either of them. Instead, I scrubbed my apartment floor until the wood gleamed, polished the old candlesticks Ellen had loved, and set the long oak table with the good plates. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil and metal polish, sharp, clean, almost ceremonial. It wasn't a family dinner I was preparing. It was an execution dressed in linen. The invitations went out quietly. Mrs. Alvarez agreed without hesitation, her eyes flashing with the righteous anger only a long-suffering neighbor can carry. Pavel, the notary, promised to bring certified copies of every document, stamped and sealed. And Elena, the journalist I'd known since my union days, cleared her schedule with a grin in her voice. "This," she said, "sounds like a story people will talk about for years." By Sunday evening, everything was in place. The roast beef filled the apartment with rich, heavy scent, rosemary and garlic weaving through the air. The candles burned steady, their flames bending just slightly when the draft of footsteps came up the stairwell. At 6:03, the doorbell rang. I opened it to see my son, my daughter, and, God help them, another set of buyers. Two men in sharp suits, their expressions polite but impatient, like wolves dressed in silk. My daughter smiled, too wide, her voice brittle. "Dad, we thought we'd have dinner together. You don't mind a couple of friends joining?" I stepped aside with a thin smile. Of course, the more, the merrier. They filed in, shaking off coats, exchanging polite greetings. My children relaxed when they saw the table, the wine, the warm light. They thought I'd surrendered, that this was my peace offering. They didn't notice the other chair set at the far end of the table until the knock came 5 minutes later. Pavel entered first, briefcase in hand, his suit pressed, his eyes sharp. Behind him came Mrs. Alvarez, clutching her purse like a weapon. And last, Elena, the journalist, with her notebook ready and a photographer trailing her like a shadow. The buyers blinked, surprised. My son's smile faltered. My daughter's hands twitched against her wine glass. "Dad," my son began, his voice low, "what is this?" "This," I said calmly, taking my seat at the head of the table, "is dinner. Sit." They sat. For a while, the clatter of forks and the scrape of knives on plates filled the silence. No one spoke. The beef was tender, the wine bitter. I chewed slowly, letting them squirm in the candlelight. Then I set down my fork, wiped my hands on a napkin, and nodded at Pavel. He stood, opened his briefcase, and spread the documents across the table like a dealer laying down cards. Real ownership papers, cooperative shares, certified seals glinting under the light. Then, beside them, The forgeries my children had slipped to me weeks earlier. Crooked stamps, shaky signatures, dates that didn't line up. Pavel's voice was calm, precise. These signatures are falsified. This authorization is fabricated. Under state law, this constitutes attempted fraud and carries a potential prison term of up to 7 years. The buyers pushed back their chairs, eyes wide. One muttered, "What the hell?" The other shot my son a look sharp enough to cut steel. "You told us this was clean." Before my son could sputter a reply, Mrs. Alvarez leaned forward. Her voice cracked with age but carried the force of a hammer. "I saw them. Your son and that so-called notary. Whispering in the hallway, pointing at your door, waving those papers like they already owned the place. Don't you dare say otherwise. I've lived here long enough to know a thief when I see one." My daughter's face collapsed. She tried to speak, but only a stammer came out. My son's fists clenched on the table, his jaw grinding. Then Elena spoke, her pen scratching fast. "This is quite the story," she said softly. "Children attempting to defraud their father of his home. Forged documents. Double-selling schemes. Tell me, Mr. Hale, would you like to comment on how you discovered it?" I looked straight at my children, my voice steady as stone. "I discovered it the way you discover rot in the walls. You smell it. You see the cracks. And once you tear away the paint, you realize it was there all along." The photographer's camera clicked, the flash bouncing off the walls. My daughter flinched as though the light itself burned. The buyers stood abruptly, muttering curses as they stormed out, their shoes pounding down the stairwell. My son half rose, ready to follow, but I raised a hand. "Sit. We're not finished." He froze, eyes darting between the folder of evidence and the journalist's pen. I leaned back, folding my hands. "You thought you could trick me with sloppy papers and cheap lies. You thought age had dulled me, that grief had blinded me. But you forgot the one thing I taught you when you were children. I don't build houses on sand. And I don't build my life on trust that hasn't been earned." The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of silence that crushes even the strongest men. Finally, I stood, my chair scraping back slow, deliberate. Tonight was just the beginning. Next comes the law. And when it arrives, you won't just lose this apartment. You'll lose your names, your reputations, everything you pretended to own. My daughter's lips trembled. "Dad, please." I cut her off with a single look. Cold. Final. The candles flickered, throwing long shadows across their faces. Faces I once knew as children, now strangers twisted by greed. I let the silence hang one moment longer. Then I spoke, my words low and sharp, each syllable a nail hammered into wood. "You tried to bury me in a nursing home, but you buried yourselves instead. And now everyone knows." The article hit the papers 2 days later. Front page. Bold headline. "Children plot to defraud elderly father of his home. Forged papers exposed." Elena didn't soften a single detail. She laid out the entire scheme. The fake documents, the attempted double sale, the neighbor's testimony, the certified report from Pavel. She even printed a photo, my son and daughter caught in the flash of her photographer's camera, their faces pale, twisted, desperate. The caption beneath was simple. "Caught." By noon, everyone in the district had seen it. At the bakery, customers passed the paper from hand to hand, shaking their heads. At the market, vendors whispered as my daughter tried to shop, her cheeks blotched red. By evening, my son's employer had called him in, not to work, but to explain why his name was on the front page of a fraud scandal. The fallout was faster than I expected. The police came first, asking for the original papers, which Pavel had already notarized and sealed. I handed them over, calm, steady, the way a man hands over bullets when the battle's already won. They thanked me, promised a formal investigation, and left. That night, my phone rang. My daughter. Her voice cracked, hoarse from crying. "Dad, please, you have to stop this. People are laughing at us. Christopher's boss suspended him. The neighbors won't look me in the eye. We'll lose everything." I listened. I let her sob into the receiver. Then I said the words I'd been carrying like stones in my chest. "You lost everything the moment you decided I was a burden. This isn't punishment. It's consequence." She begged. She promised. She swore they would change. I hung up before she could finish. 2 nights later, I heard shouting in the courtyard. My son, his voice ragged, drunk. It was supposed to be ours. The apartment, the money, all of it. His words echoed off the walls, loud enough for every neighbor leaning out their window to hear. Mrs. Alvarez told me later she saw him throw a bottle against the fence, glass shattering like his pride. Meanwhile, Elena published a follow-up piece. She didn't just report the scandal. She framed it as a lesson. Kindness mistaken for weakness, the headline read. The story spread beyond our neighborhood, picked up by bigger outlets. Suddenly, my name wasn't just whispered in pity. It was spoken with respect. The old man who fought back. The father who didn't let blood blind him. As for my children, their masks were gone. The neighbors crossed the street to avoid them. Friends stopped calling. Even their own children, my grandchildren, began to ask questions they couldn't answer. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I walked past my daughter's house. She stood in the window, staring out with hollow eyes, clutching the curtains as though they might shield her from the world's gaze. For a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I remembered the stack of forged papers, her voice telling me about the wonderful retirement home, the way she smiled when she thought I'd signed away my life. Pity died in my chest. Instead, I thought of Ellen, of the years we'd fought to build something solid, something worth keeping. And I realized this wasn't just revenge. This was justice. They'd tried to bury me quietly. Instead, they buried themselves loudly, publicly, irreversibly. And I wasn't finished. Because the last strike, the one that would turn their humiliation into ruin, was still waiting in my pocket. A single document, folded neat, tucked beside my wallet. The paper that proved the apartment was only half the treasure. The knock came just after dusk. I knew it would. I opened the door to find my daughter, her eyes swollen, makeup streaked, hair a mess. My son stood behind her, shoulders stiff, jaw set like stone about to crack. They looked smaller, thinner, as if shame had already chewed pieces out of them. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice barely holding together. We need to talk." I stepped aside. "Then talk." They walked in like thieves returning to the scene of the crime. The apartment smelled of soup simmering on the stove, rosemary and onions softening in the heat. My home. Not theirs. Never theirs. My son tried first, his tone forced steady. "Look, the papers, that was a mistake. We got carried away. But the damage is done. Everyone knows. You've proved your point. Can't we just put this behind us?" Behind us. As if betrayal is a puddle you step over and forget. I said nothing. I let the silence push against them until my daughter blurted out, "Dad, please. The shame is killing us. Christopher lost his job. The neighbors won't speak to me. The kids, your grandchildren, ask why people call their parents thieves. We're ruined." I looked at her, at the woman I once carried on my shoulders to watch fireworks. The woman who now plotted to stuff me in a retirement home for the sake of 4 walls and a deed. And then I pulled the folded paper from my pocket and placed it on the table between us. "This," I said softly, "is why you'll never recover." My son's brow furrowed as he snatched it up. He scanned the lines, his lips moving silently. Then his face drained of blood. What is this?" "It's the cooperative share," I said. "From the 80s. This building wasn't just apartments. It was part of a larger investment. Land. Storage units. Rights that most people forgot existed. I didn't forget. The papers were hidden. Secure. Legal." My daughter's hands trembled as she read over his shoulder. This means that the apartment was never the prize," I interrupted, my voice like ice. "The real wealth is in the cooperative stake. Worth 10 times what you thought you were stealing. And it's mine. Locked in a trust. Irrevocable. Even if I die tomorrow, not a single brick, not a single coin will ever reach you." The silence was suffocating. My son's chest heaved, his knuckles white around the document. "You tricked us," he spat. "No," I said, leaning forward. "You tricked yourselves. You thought I was old, weak, blind. You saw kindness and called it stupidity. But while you schemed, I was building a wall higher than your greed could ever climb." My daughter broke then, tears spilling, her body shaking. "Dad, please, we're family. I stood slowly, the chair scraping back, the sound sharp in the small room. Family? Family doesn't sell your home behind your back. Family doesn't forge your name. Family doesn't plan your exile while smiling over dinner. I stepped closer, my shadow falling across both of them. You buried that word the moment you signed those fake papers. Now all you have left is your shame. My son slammed the document down, his voice cracking with fury. You'll regret this. I smiled. Cold. Certain. No, son. You will. They left in silence, the door closing with a hollow thud that echoed through the apartment long after their footsteps vanished. I sat back at the table, unfolded the document once more, and let my fingers trace the ink. Ellen's photo watched me from the shelf, her smile steady, eternal. They thought they could erase me, I murmured to her. But I erased them. The soup bubbled on the stove. Outside, the night settled heavy over the city. The stage was set for the final blow. And when it came, it wouldn't just humiliate them. It would bury them for good. The town hall smelled of damp coats and old wood polish. A Sunday gathering, neighbors pressed shoulder to shoulder, whispering about the scandal that had already cracked through the walls of my family. Elena, the journalist, had promised to attend, and she did. Front row, notebook balanced on her knee, eyes sharp as a scalpel. Beside her sat Mrs. Alvarez, her posture straight with the righteous pride of someone who had seen liars exposed. I stood at the podium, papers stacked in front of me. My hands were steady. My voice carried through the room, stronger than I'd expected. Some of you know my children tried to sell my apartment with forged documents. What you don't know is that they aimed lower than their greed deserved. Gasps rippled through the hall. My son and daughter sat near the back, pale, stiff, trying not to be seen. I lifted the final document high enough for all to see. This building is not just a home. It carries a cooperative share, land, units, rights, worth more than they ever imagined. And it is secured in trust, irrevocable, beyond their reach. While they forged signatures and lied about retirement homes, I made sure their hands will never touch a cent. The murmur grew into open voices, surprise, approval, disbelief. The photographer's camera flashed, catching the moment my son dropped his face into his hands, my daughter's shoulders shaking. I leaned forward, my words sharp as nails hammered into their coffin. Family is not forged documents. Family is not greed disguised as care. Family is sacrifice repaid with trust. And when trust is broken, there is no inheritance, no mercy, no future under my name. The crowd erupted. Some clapped. Others shook their heads at my children. Elena's pen flew across her page, already shaping the story that would stain them forever. I gathered the papers, folded them once, and slid them into my jacket. Then I delivered the line I had been carrying like a blade in my chest. You wanted to put me in a home for the forgotten. Instead, you put yourselves in the graveyard of memory. From this day forward, you are not my heirs. You are not my family. You are only the warning I leave behind. Silence fell heavy. My children didn't rise. They didn't protest. They sat frozen, stripped of their masks, drowning in their own disgrace. I walked out of the hall into the cold night air. The sky was clear, the stars sharp. For the first time in months, I breathed easy. Ellen's voice echoed in my mind, steady and sure. Kindness makes you invisible, but truth makes you unforgettable. They had tried to erase me. Instead, I erased them.